So I have no doubt that when we go to the arena here in Sao Paulo, there will be people who will come up to me and say, like, I'll have that conversation again. Like, Kicks meant a lot to me. And now it's at the point where it's not irritating. It's really nice because it's a constant reminder then. Then it was a constant reminder of him not being here. But now it's a constant reminder of when he was here, how much he meant to people and how much people still think about him. 69.
69. Oh. If we get to 69 episodes, then we're probably doing something right. 3, 2, 1. Hello and welcome. It's the Jake and Guzz show. Presenting this time, though, we've got Parker, INTERRO, a living legend when it comes to Rainbow Six Siege. I can say that.
No, you can.
I think that's factually correct at this point in Parker's career.
I'll allow it.
And firstly, I just want to say thank you very much for joining our illustrious set, which is Guzz's bedroom.
It's a hell of a place.
Did it smell weird when you walked in?
No, it didn't. I
Good.
was a little concerned. You messaged me on WhatsApp very mischievously. It was like, when you're done showering, come to the green room. I'll bring you up. I'm like, what am I in for? What's going to happen here?
Nothing bad yet.
Is when every time somebody walks into your hotel room, you have to say what they always said on MTV Cribs. You have to be like, this is where the magic happens.
This is where the magic happens, but
The magic's happening right now.
not with him. More so with our guests,
Of course.
which you are now very much a part of. So yeah, massive thank you obviously for coming on and having a chat with us. And how's the event so far? For those, of course, this is probably going to be out in the far future. We're halfway through Six Invitational 2024. How have you found your time in Brazil?
When you say far future, are we talking like September?
I think in about 4-ish weeks from now.
Okay.
Semi-far future.
So not September.
No.
No, the event's good. I mean, it's nice to be back in Brazil. I quite like this country. I have a soft spot for Brazil, and Sao Paulo in particular, because it was the first live event I ever did. As for the event itself, it doesn't feel like a Six Invitational. Like I'm so hardwired to just immediately compare Montreal to SI, just like they're intertwined. Obviously, we had the two during COVID, but it's like it doesn't really feel the same here because it's like hot. I'm so used to it being cold and being miserable.
Is that why you're adorning the turtleneck, or?
So there's a thing called air conditioning.
It is actually quite cold in the hotel.
Yes,
especially in the green room.
Green room
it's
is
like,
freezing.
Yeah.
cold.
The temperature regulation is very different from room to room. I imagine by the end of this podcast, you might be in a pool of sweat since you've opted for a very nice attire. Let's get on to the main segments that we've got here, of course, when it comes to the Jake and Guzz show, a little bit different to the Siege show, where it's not predominantly only about Rainbow Six. We'd like to get a little bit more of an understanding to our guests. And to start with that, it's about where did you start with that, Parker? What was your introduction to Rainbow Six Siege at the very least?
I started playing Rainbow Six back, God, it would have been like 2004, 2005. It was one of the old ones. I got it on Xbox. I went to a Blockbuster Video. And I used to rent video games, and I saw Rainbow Six, and it was like a gritty M-rated shooter. And of course, I'm like 13, 14 years old at the time. I'm like, this is good. You need parental permission to get it. So I just played it, and I was like, this game's sick. It was my first real time playing a game that had like high stakes. I was used to very forgiving shooters that were arcadey in nature, but like in the older Rainbow Sixes, it's like you peek the wrong corner and you're just instantly dead. It was a very humbling experience. And then obviously as Siege came out, it didn't exactly have the smoothest launch. But over time, I had a couple friends that played it, and upon their recommendation, I purchased it. I thought it was a lot of fun. Very
quickly,
yeah,
Michael, have you ever gone to a Blockbuster and rented a video game?
No, I have. I was only bored in 2000, dude. Like when I was like 6, 7.
They did close by probably about 2012-ish or something. So
no, I went there.
You might have just got in.
Yeah,
maybe just got in. Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned
our grandparents talking about the moon landing.
It's not that foreign of a concept. Like, gee whiz, relax.
Obviously, you mentioned you basically then, I guess, been from the very beginning when it comes to Rainbow Six Siege. When you got into it at the start, and it wasn't probably what it is now. Did you ever imagine it would probably have this kind of longevity?
I mean, I didn't know. I started in Red Crow, so that was what, the 4th season, give or take. And it was definitely it was a very intriguing game. Admittedly, when I first started playing it, I didn't know anything about the comp scene. I didn't know there was an esports scene, like none of that stuff. But it was competitive enough where I thought there could be. And then obviously as I started to get more and more into it, I found out about GoForce through like ESL and stuff like that. And then I had a couple friends I just played with casually that competed. I ended up looking up something on YouTube. I ended up seeing a Macy J video, and then I ended up getting recommended like a Pro League video. And I was pleasantly surprised to know that there was a comp scene. And honestly, like if a game is supported by the developer and the comp scene is actually competitive, I think a lot of games can manage to, prop up an esports scene for a while. So I'm glad that Ubisoft has been investing in it. I think it's a great game competitively, and I think the esport kicks ass.
Obviously, you kind of segueing us into what would be
He's doing his job very well.
Exactly. We expect it from Parker. The esports and broadcasting side of things. I mean, it's one thing, obviously, for you to be maybe a little bit curious regarding the potential esports of the game. But in terms of broadcasting, was that something that you were like, oh, I'd like to get involved into said scene once you found out about these GoForce?
I mean, no. I was in kind of a transitional period of my life. I had just a couple months prior to starting, Rainbow Six, I just moved home from living out in the mountains. I basically ran away from university because I was tired of my degree and I was tired of working in politics. And I kind of came back to, real life. Having a job in video games feels like fake life. So if you run away from fake life to come back to real life, you don't immediately think you're going to go back into fake life. I was enrolled at university to go back and finish up what was left of my degree, which at the time was poli-sci, into urban and regional planning. And casting in the esport was just kind of something I did as a hobby. That was it. And I had friends that did it, and I felt it was a lot of fun. It suddenly becomes a job, and that is shocking. My parents didn't believe me. I didn't even believe it. I landed in Poland, and I was like, all right, well, I guess this is real.
This is where it's going. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I think that's probably a very common story for a lot of esports casters. I mean, for myself, I was in university, and then it just was a hobby that eventually turned into a job. I don't even know about your story, guys. Maybe one day we'll find out. Not today.
It was the same. I was in uni. I was doing finishing my undergrad in 2020. And it was late 2019. I did my first Pro League, and then
I'll drink to that.
Went from there.
It's the passion of it first, isn't it? Yeah. First and foremost. I think many people who aim to get into this business now, it's a little bit different because it's far more mainstream in some ways. So for a lot of people, it's like, oh, this is esports. This is this job. I want to do it for the money.
It's more sexy, is how I would describe it. Or at least that's how people perceive it from the outside.
Yeah, I think that obviously when it comes to beginning that journey in esports, though, it means that we don't have the bigger picture in terms of the way everything is ran. And so therefore for you, when you eventually started to get involved and you had that career, was it play-by-play? Was it color? Was it analyst? Did you know about these roles and what you wanted to essentially follow in terms of that path?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I watched a lot of sports. So I knew about announcing and commentary and stuff like that. And my original desire when I was in high school was I wanted to get into some form of media, whether it be journalism or broadcasting. I actually applied for one of the top broadcasting programs in the country, and I got waitlisted for it, which obviously was a bit devastating, but I mean, that's also kind of my own fault. My grades weren't probably as good as they could have been. Sorry.
Is that a beer burp?
It's a beer burp. You can let them out, mate. There's
going to be more.
You're okay with that one?
Yeah, I mean, I knew about it. I knew what the roles were, and I'd done some really light commentary work back in 2009, 2010 for a small Call of Duty league on PC, and that was fun. I did 2 matches or something like that, so I knew about it. Obviously, at the time, Rainbow Six Esports was a lot smaller. So the very first event I worked in Sao Paulo, I was also an analyst. So when Kix and I weren't casting, we were on the desk with Matt Andrews. There was no stage host. It was Matt Andrews doing both. He was stage host and desk host. There were no analysts. It was just casters doing both. So, it was a fulfilling weekend, but I learned a lot, and the esport grew very quickly after that, to the point where we started to delineate those roles. Hosts became split up. We started to have Matt Andrews doing stage host, Milos doing desk hosting, and then we actually got people who were qualified to be analysts and not me. But it wasn't unfamiliar territory. I just didn't know where Rainbow Six was going to go, because when I got involved, it was really young.
Yeah. I think in its infancy, it was probably difficult to understand the the path of it, how big it could eventually get. And I think probably then 2017, 18, 19 were quite exponentially big in terms of its growth up until COVID. And then that's a whole different debate. And I guess touching on that subject for you, casting wise, 2017, which feels like a lifetime ago compared to, say, now, this current era of Rainbow Six Siege. What are probably some of the biggest differences that you feel like are there between the two very, very different versions of the game?
Do you want me to focus on the game, or do you want me to focus on
a little bit of both, I guess? Because I feel like they're intertwined in some degree.
I think so. I mean, obviously, I don't know if Ubisoft had a coherent vision for what they wanted the esports scene to be. I mean, frankly, it seems like it still kind of changes every 2 to 3 years when we get a new tourney organizer, right? What ESL might want might be different from what Faceit wants, and it's, I think, certainly Blast has taken the esport in a different direction. And Ubisoft's team has changed so much over time, where the Montreal office used to oversee a lot of this, and then, you know, it was kind of split between regional leagues where it's like, you know, you had the NCSA and EMEA teams, and then now there's like an esports team based out of like Paris that does most of the day-to-day work, including SI. So obviously, like, that upheaval has meant changes for the esport and what the pro scene looks like. Just from a casting perspective, I mean, we didn't really know what we were doing. I didn't certainly know what I was doing. You know, the game was rapidly changing. New operators were having enormous impact on the meta right away. New maps were coming out. They tinkered a lot with the actual format of the game. You know, we used to go one attacking round, one defending round, and it used to only be like 1st to 5 or whatever, and then they decided to change it, and then it's 6 and 6, and now it's 1st to 7, and lots of stuff coming in with operator bans as well. It made it really rewarding to nail a broadcast, because it felt like I was constantly learning on the job. I still think I am, but just in a different way. It wasn't like I'm trying to figure out the format, I'm trying to figure out how to cast the game. Now obviously it's more meta shifts, but as for the game itself, I mean, the scope of the game is much larger. I think the balancing has been far more esports focused as of late, which is good. But they're still balancing around casual play, which in my opinion, a bit too much. But for casual players, probably not enough. But if you look back at where the esport was, you had small orgs, you had weak salaries, you had, you know, there were players playing who had full-time jobs. Now playing is a full-time job, and people are able to put their all into it. So it's completely different from what it was, you know, 7-8 years ago, when you'd be paid in basically exposure and tubs of G Fuel.
I guess picking up from that point a little bit, at what point did you go, wow, I can actually do this as a full-time job? Was that when you got the ticket to Poland for the first time? Was that after your first Six Invitational? At what point did you say, wow, I can actually do this as a full-time job properly?
So I don't think a lot of people know, I had a job that I actually took a break from when I went to Poland the first time. And when I came back from Sao Paulo in 2017, I went right back to work, and I worked it for, you know, a couple months. It wasn't until I got offered a contract to go back to Poland in March of 2018 when the salary that was being offered was enough to actually live off of. If I'd stayed in Toronto, the salary would not have been enough, but we were living in Poland, and the purchasing power of the US dollar over there was way higher. You know, for literally like $60 US, I'd get 2 weeks worth of groceries and live like a king. So I didn't really care how much I was making. Again, it goes back to that being, it's a passion industry. And honestly, because it's a passion industry, a lot of people kind of get taken advantage of. I think our early salary was criminally low for what we were doing. But in Poland, that money went really far. So I didn't think much of it. And then thankfully, I was able to stream as well, which went a long way, because I was not able to basically double my income at the time, but I was able to give myself a really nice cushion from streaming while also passing the time, because Poland was very isolating. So being over there, you're far away from friends, you're far away from family, you're far away from the comforts of home, in a place where you're mostly working at night, in a place that speaks a completely different language from you. And the city we were in, Katowice, it's a rural, like, it's not a rural, it's like a blue collar working town. In a huge population center, but it's not like a metropolitan area where things are open late. You know, it's not like you're in Paris. It's not like you're in, you know, like LA. So it really just came down to me looking at how much money I was making and saying, look, I can live off of this. It's not going to be glamorous, but I need to find other ways to make money. So I started doing content on the side. I started doing voiceover work, and it ended up proving to be enough. But at that point, finances weren't ultimately driving that decision.
Very quickly before we get on to Six Invitational 2018, which I think is a really big event in the grand scheme of things.
It's okay.
If we were able to take current day Parker 2024 version, transported back in time to 2017, what are some of the lessons that you have learned, that you have experienced, say more so, I guess, during those earlier portions, especially, that you could then relay to young, in his 20s Parker?
Right.
Still learning the trade, still going through these things, Poland for the first time, etc. What are some of the lessons that you go, I wish I knew this, or I wish I was able to have learnt this experience and then know a little bit more?
Well, I had a ticking time bomb in me at the time, which was called type 1 diabetes that I didn't know was on the horizon. So I would say eat as many carbs as humanly possible because those days are going to be behind you pretty quickly.
Well, I mean, probably more in relation to commentary, Parker. And it's not like go back and put all your money into Apple.
No, I know. Buy Bitcoin.
Buy Bitcoin.
Don't buy Bitcoin. I mean, I don't know really what I would give in terms of advice. I think there were times where working with KiXSTAr was a challenge because I didn't really feel at the beginning like an equal in the partnership, because I mean, like, he was this really famous player who was at one point, I think you could probably argue that he was the most popular figure in like Rainbow Six Esports. And then he goes from being a player to being this caster who ends up becoming, a darling on the desk. And I come in as the new guy, and don't get me wrong, like, I thought I could keep pace with him in terms of my ability on the desk, but I didn't think I had the leg to stand on when it came to sitting him down and saying, like, hey, we have to work on this. And it took a couple years until he almost quit casting to take a position in Dark Zero, that we had that kind of, hard truths come to Jesus conversation where I said, like, we have a lot to work on as co-casters. And the only thing I guess I would kind of give myself feedback for, or advice on, if I went back in time, was stand up for yourself in that regard a little bit sooner. Like, I'm aware that I largely got this job because of him, and I owe him a lot for that. But I think our casting could have improved much quicker if I had been more confident in giving him that feedback. I was a little too timid, and it shouldn't have taken, 2 years or so, or however long it took for us to finally start actually talking about how we wanted to cast. And I do think a part of that is that I didn't know what I wanted to do in regards to casting. I didn't know how I wanted to approach the duo, so that was also a challenge. But kind of figuring out how we could improve, I think, would have ultimately made us better casters. Because speaking of those 2018 finals, it sucks that that is the match that everybody references, because looking at it now, I think to myself, man, if that had happened in 2020, I would have done a significantly better job of casting that match. And it bums me out that it came so early in my career, because I think I could have done it more justice on the mic.
Well said. Well said. This is where you now go into the next. Come on, I can't do everything on the show.
It's a Xenox show featuring Guzz and INTERRO.
Exactly.
That's just our dynamic. We'll circle back. We'll circle back to Kix later, of course. But honing in now on Six Invitational 2018, talk us through a little bit about, I suppose, probably receiving the initial offer, and then what was the sentiment around the event at the time? Because 2017 was a pretty downscaled, low-key event, especially compared to what it was in 2018, never mind now. So what were your initial emotions, reactions, and preparation, I suppose, heading into that event? I
mean, think about it. Like, the August event of 2017 was in a booth at Gamescom. It was not like a sexy affair. The Pro League final before that was in Poland in the ESL studio, which they use for fucking mobile games. Am I allowed to swear, by the way?
You can say whatever the fuck you want, mate.
Can.
Yeah.
They use them for fucking mobile games. Like, there's like a room for 30 people in the audience. This was not like a big deal, right? So we came to Sao Paulo originally. There was 1,000 people in the crowd at that Max 5 arena just down the street from us. And it felt big, but the problem that I encountered was that because it was all Brazilian fans, I didn't feel any connection to the event. So when we come to Montreal in February 2018, everybody I know is there, because all of my like friends in the scene, so to speak, are all North Americans, and they decide to show up. So it felt like, in a way, my first event, even though it wasn't. It felt like it because Now you get to meet the people that you've been talking to online for, you know, the better part of a year. You get to meet the Ubisoft devs in much greater numbers, because there were a couple in Sao Paulo, but they basically only sent like 5 or 10 of them. Whereas you're down the street from UB Montreal. And we actually got to go to UB Montreal while we were there, which was mind blowing to me. You know, like growing up as a kid, I read Nintendo Power and Electronic Gaming Monthly and all this stuff. And I just thought like, man, it would be so cool to work at a game studio. So as, you know, a 28-year-old, well, at the time, I guess technically it was 27, doesn't really matter, getting to actually step into a game studio as big as Ubisoft, who's made some of like my favorite games, like the original Assassin's Creed series is one of my favorite series of all time. It felt unreal. But the game was also ramping up at the time, right? Like, so we had all these tiny orgs in 2017, but then Rogue joins, and then Evil Geniuses joins, and then FaZe Clan joins, and then Team Liquid joins, and then Mouse joins. And suddenly we have all these big, like legitimate esports organizations taking notice in our game. And that was really exciting, because it honestly felt like we were ascending to the big leagues. And then you get there and you're in this big arena at the time. Obviously, we just sold out an arena of like 15,000 people for this event in particular. But at the time it was like, man, there's like 1,000 people here, and it's all these people I've known online, and the devs are here, and Macy J is here, and Ammunition is here, and, you know, Panky, the original caster, is here. I went from basically 5 months prior being a fan to now this being my job. You know, like act like you've been there before. And I get the offer and it's cool, but then I get told basically like, we also want you to do the finals. And we did the finals in Brazil, but again, the casting is in Portuguese. The people in the audience are not hearing you. So to know that people in the crowd are going to be hearing my voice as I cast whatever the match was, and it ends up being the best game I've ever played, it was a huge honor, and it didn't feel real. The high before we went live is a height that I genuinely don't think that I've hit since. And it's a little sad to say, but I mean, the team's got to write a better story and play a better game if we want to top 2018.
I don't really want to make drug references, but I guess it's like chasing that high now is probably going to be very difficult, is it not, after what was...
I'll drink to that.
a very, very great 2018. I mean, I guess just winding it back ever so slightly, I guess, to before the event even begun, in terms of the expectations from, I guess, yourself individually going into the event, because as you mentioned, you know, prior to 2018, it wasn't quite that sort of high lavish event. So as you've obviously started to see the build up and what's happening and all these orgs joining and how big the event's going to be, I guess what were the expectations for you heading into that event?
I mean, at the time, EG and G2, which at the time was Penta, and they would be Penta for the entirety of the event. It wasn't until, what was it, Atlantic City that they got picked up? Or technically, maybe it was the Paris Major. I actually forget when G2 picked them up. I can't remember if they were...
Yeah, I don't think it was Atlantic, but...
I think they were still Penta in Atlantic City. But, I mean, the story itself revolves around those finals. And I mean, you have to tell the story, basically, that it's like, you know, Continuum, that's now been picked up by EG, had a really rough year. They almost got relegated. And now they're bouncing back and they look really good. Expectations on them were super high in Sao Paulo, and then they get defeated in the very first round by the eventual winners. But still, you know, they're playing like they could easily win an event. And then, of course, Penta is the best team on the planet at this point. They've won everything except for a 6 Invitational, which is eerily reminiscent of what we're going through right now with W7M. Or whomever ends up, you know, picking up that squad, which is funny because, I mean, if this gets posted in like 4 weeks, we might actually know by then what org.
Our future selves
I think we've already got an SI winner and W7M's new org.
Yeah, well, either way, I should hope so. And I hope we have an SI winner in 4 weeks. Something has gone horribly wrong. But I mean, the expectations on the event were, you know, FaZe Clan also looked excellent. That Font Energy roster that just got picked up by FaZe Clan looked really, really good. Expectations were really high for Liquid, who ultimately didn't even end up making the top 8. But it looked like a really competitive event on paper. And it was the biggest scope that we've had as well, right? We had the group stages. We had APAC teams here that were competing in more than just a single match. Because if you recall, the only other international event that APAC had competed in at that point was Sao Paulo. And Ainz and Mantis FPS, I think they won like 1 round each, and that was pretty much it. And they got smoked. So now all of a sudden we actually have APAC competing. I think people were expecting these big orgs to funnel a lot of money in and prepare teams really well for the event. And I think honestly it lived up to the billing. The group stages were electric. we didn't expect certain teams to do well. We didn't expect certain teams to, get smoked the way they did. ENCE surprised us. Black Dragons surprised us. I think it was Supremacy at the time. The old Vitality that Bibu was on surprised us. It was great. I don't think anybody expected EG to give Penta a run for their money in those finals. But I'm very glad they did, because if they hadn't, we would have basically had this huge event with all this hype and hoopla behind it, and then just a stinker of a grand final like the Paris Major would end up being. Paris Major finals stunk. And I think having a competitive matchup in SI has kind of fueled a narrative that is still kind of going, if I'm being honest.
I suppose to put a bit of a cherry on top then for SI 18, you mentioned there obviously the privilege of working the grand final, perhaps coming as a surprise, I'm not entirely sure, but what was your feeling, or what were your feelings and emotions in the build up to that? Were you nervous? Was there a lot of anxiety surrounding that? And how did you manage that? I guess obviously from a personal perspective, Jake and I will be doing a quarterfinal at SI, not quite the same scale, of course, but I mean, it's going to be with a crazy crowd, my first stadium cast. How did you manage that build up? Was it a challenge?
That's a good question, actually. I didn't really feel a lot of nerves in Sao Paulo because I knew the crowd wasn't listening to me. So I'm the kind of person who I don't typically get stage fright even in front of an audience. But if it's going to happen, it's going to happen when I have eyes on me. When I'm sitting at a desk and all I'm staring at is a camera, there could be one person watching. There could be a million people watching. To me, the stakes are the same in my mind, and I'm not going to approach it any differently. I didn't know at the time that when we were doing the SI finals, there were like 300,000 people watching. I had no idea. I was blown away afterwards. And I'm kind of glad I didn't know that while I was casting, because I fear it would have made me a little bit more timid.
You would have shit yourself.
I don't usually shit myself, no. And I don't know if I would have at that time, but maybe, who knows? Surprises happen. But no, when we were in Sao Paulo, I didn't really get stage fright, because when they threw to us, I knew the people in the audience couldn't hear us. But at SI, that wasn't the case. And every single person sitting immediately around us was hearing everything I was saying. And I could see them reacting to what I was saying. Whereas when we're broadcasting either online or at a studio, there's no audience. So I know that while people are watching, I'm kind of insulated. But in Montreal, people can physically see me while I'm casting. And that's when things got I got kind of nervous, First quarterfinal kicks in on the Friday, and they throw to us, and I realize that, everybody's cheering, and then the arena goes quiet. And the only thing they hear is what I'm saying. And that's a lot of pressure on your shoulders. Even though there's far fewer people in the audience than there are watching at home, it's the people in the audience who ultimately I care about more. And that's what made me get a little bit nervous. As, Saturday and Sunday rolled around, I had pushed all that away and I didn't feel any stage fright or nerves whatsoever. But that first Friday matchup, I genuinely, my hands were kind of trembling when they threw to us. And I don't know if you can see it. I've never gone back and rewatched it, but I feel like you can see it if you look hard enough.
I feel like at some point that might be worth a rewatch in the future.
Maybe.
Nice glass of wine, sit down.
What game was that? Do you remember?
I'll drink to that.
Who was playing in that game?
The first match that we did, I think it was ENCE Penta.
Oof.
I think it was.
That's a curtain raiser.
Or maybe it was ENCE Black Dragons. I think ENCE was in our first match. Truth be told, I don't remember anything but the grand final. I think we did Rogue. I think we did Rogue EG, and I think the other side of the bracket was Penta Black Dragons. And I think that was the one that Gassan and Emzo did. But my memory's failing me here. I actually don't remember. I don't usually remember quarters and semis, to be honest. I usually only remember the grand finals. Because that's the only one that fucking matters.
Yeah, exactly. The quarterfinal that you're about to do doesn't fucking matter.
Thanks.
Should obviously reference the fact that
that's not what I meant, that.
We've only just started playoffs in terms of a timestamp for people maybe wondering as to when we are filming this. We still have 2 days of playoffs and then eventually into the arena itself.
Sonics just 2-0'd Wolves.
They did.
And then after Wolves beat W7M, so Sonics is the best team in the world and they're going to win SI.
Well...
And then they'll have to escape Brazil.
That level of analysis is why you're doing a quarterfinal.
I'm sure someone's in the comments saying, guys, but actually, it was Bliss that won SI.
If Bliss wins SI, I will shake.
I'm getting real fucked up if Bliss wins SI.
If Bliss wins SI, I'm shaking.
That
my
after
head
party is, I might not survive that. All right.
Everybody, Guzz is paying for everybody's drinks.
Let's move forward a little bit in time because I don't think we need to probably touch too much on 2019. It's all a little bit same. It's all a bit of a continuation, if you will, in terms of the rise of Rainbow Six Siege. And then obviously we hit COVID and there's that kind of little reset moment, and probably not wanting to spend too much time on this, but when COVID did obviously hit and we all start to go kind of online with things, was there a change in your approach to the lifestyle, the commentary, anything in mind that maybe COVID was like, oh, this is a little bit of a step back, or affected you in any way?
I am a very social person. I like going out. I like seeing friends. And one of the worst parts about Poland was being away from people I care about. It's not even just family. It's that, when I went to Poland, I was 27, which is the perfect time for friends to start having kids, to get married, to start moving away. And suddenly I moved back to Toronto, kind of against my will, because where else am I going to go? And I'm stuck at home. I'm actually living with my parents at this point because I literally couldn't go anywhere else. I was still home after SI when COVID hit. So I was basically forced with making a decision. Do I fly back to Poland? We don't know how long this is going to last for. We don't know if we're going to be working in the studio. Like, do I fly back to Poland and gamble on this blowing over relatively quickly? Or do I stay in Toronto, basically in my childhood teenage bedroom, and just kind of go from there? I ended up doing the latter, and it was inarguably the better move now that we know obviously how long it took. But it sucked to finally be home because I didn't want to live in Poland. I didn't want to live in Katowice in particular. Maybe in Warsaw or Krakow, I think it could have been a little bit different because it was a bigger city. And I mean, I'm used to living in the biggest city in the country. I'm used to living in a city where there are amenities. And I don't mean to talk down on Katowice, but it's just I would not willingly live there. It's too small for me. So to be finally home, but to not be able to leave was a huge kick in the teeth. It was nice to be on the same time zone as everybody. And it was nice to not be terribly far. And when the nice weather came around, you could go outside and see people. But, it required a huge adjustment because here I am basically spending every day at home on Discord. Not able to leave, not able to go out. The level of restrictions that we had in Toronto varied quite wildly. Some days it was like everything was closed. You couldn't go anywhere. And sometimes it was, well, you could go out, but you should only go out, to grocery stores and that's it kind of deal. And it was tough. It was really, really tough. As for casting, it obviously made it more challenging because now you're casting remotely. I've gone from working in a studio, literally sitting next to Michael or Gassan or Emza or whoever I was casting with at the time, to now sitting at home and having to do all this remotely. You can't physically see your co-caster. So that makes it very challenging. And it's compounded by the fact that Kix like to do that hybrid system. Now with Nick, it would be a lot easier because Nick does color, I do play-by-play, that's it. Basically the general flow of a round, no problem. There were lots of times where Kix would just want to hang on to it for a minute and a half because he wanted to do both color and play-by-play. And am I supposed to jump in? I don't know, I can't see it. I don't know where the cue is for me to pick up. And there were times where I would just make a pause because I think sometimes pauses are good in Rainbow Six, and he would jump in when in all reality, I wasn't ready to throw it. I still had more to say. That made it a challenge. Additionally, that was when NAL picked up a desk host and an analyst desk. So my workload ultimately decreased because in Poland, I was the host of our duo and we both worked as analysts as well. So now all I need to do is cast the match and move on. That was a lot of change for, the span of a couple months, and compounded by the fact that we're in a global pandemic where we have no idea what's going to happen. I'm now immunocompromised. I've got family members that are immunocompromised. And you have the general worry about well, shit, if we catch this thing, are we going to die? It was a lot to take in all at once.
I'll pick up on the point there about change, which was, felt by everybody at the time. But there was also, that window where yourself and Kix also looked to diversify your casting portfolio. There was a bit of Valorant that you guys did. I don't know what specifically, but I'm sure you'll be able to dive into that. What motivated that decision as you crack open a cold one? And is there any motivation to diversify in future?
There was a period of time where we had discussed branching out to other esports for a variety of reasons. Rainbow Six obviously was more than paying the bills, so it certainly wasn't a financial consideration for either of us. But I think there was just like a general malaise with working in the same esport. You know, we wanted to be challenged, and frankly, Rainbow Six for us we didn't find was as challenging as it used to be, because you get into that routine where it's like even now. You know, I bet I could do zero prep work and show up at an event and just have enough like historical knowledge of teams to be able to fly by. And would people get the best cast possible? Like probably not, but would most people notice that I did no prep work? Probably not, right? And that's just because you've been doing it for so long. And Valorant came around and we liked the game. It was intriguing to us. We both really liked Counter-Strike. But Counter-Strike was so oversaturated at that point with excellent talent that we knew that there, even if we tried, and we might be better than some of the talent they have, maybe, but there was a long queue to get to tier 1. You know, like Launders is a good personal friend of mine. It took him like 6 years of casting CSGO before he worked a major, period. Let alone like cast the major finals just to get to a major to work it as a talent. It took him over half a decade. You know, so we were looking at, you know, what could we possibly do? Sometime around COVID, even though like Twitch and esports in general were exploding, the amount of esports that were being supported was actually contracting. It was going down and a bunch of esports leagues shut down. So when Valorant comes around, we're like, this is, you know, a new frontier. It's kind of like Counter-Strike, but also kind of like Rainbow Six in a way. Maybe we could get familiarized with this. And Nerd Street Gamers at the time was running VCT, which is the Valorant Championship Series, or Valorant Championship Tour, I think is what it's called.
Yep.
And we had a couple contacts there. And Bach, who worked for Nerd Street at the time, is an old friend of mine. I just reached out to him and he said, you know, like we're always looking for talent from other games to just come over for a couple matches or two. We did. They liked us so much. They ended up bringing us back. I think we did 4 broadcasts.
It was around that point from when I looked on.
Yeah, it was like we did 4 broadcasts, and I think we ended up getting, like, we got also offered LCQ, like, quarterfinals out of nowhere. And it was great, and we got a lot of feedback. We talked to a couple people at Riot. It was a really nice experience. Not to be kind of, you know, morbid, but that got the, you know, that door got shut the moment that Kix passed away. But prior to him, like, passing away, we had I had literally spoken to somebody at Riot like a week before the Mexico major about doing more Valorant the next year, because at that point they were like in an off season or something from like August to the end of the year. They had like next to no work. So he basically said like, let's reconvene next year and see about bringing you guys back on for some more broadcasts. Obviously that didn't come to pass, and I haven't worked Valorant or any other game since then. But it was a nice challenge for us, and we're looking at building a brand, and I think that it really benefits you to branch out creativity, like creativity wise, but also it's good to not be held by a single esport, because if Rainbow Six closes tomorrow, there's a lot of people, probably myself included, we'd be fucked, you know. And so having fallbacks is great, and we're seeing that right now. Overwatch esports basically died and is now being reinvented through ESL Faceit, and a bunch of Overwatch talent have now been starting to get picked up for VCT stuff, right? And that's great for them. But if Valorant wasn't there, they'd be shit out of luck. So branching out shows that A, you can do it. It raises your own profile, but more importantly, it's a nice contingency plan in case the main job you have stops being your main job.
What's interesting is when I looked at that particular VCT season, the vast majority of the talent that worked that event no longer work Valorant.
Yep.
And I think that's a case also when it comes to the players. I'm not going to talk too much about the players, but you think back to those first at least 2 years of Valorant was your ex-Overwatch players and Counter-Strike players and such. And so obviously it's always that race, that almost rat race. Everyone's trying to obviously see, can we get a leg in that door, which was Valorant at the time. Big thing. COVID obviously meant there were a lot of people at home, and so it was a lot easier to get onto a broadcast because you didn't have to be there in person. Touching very quickly on the point that you made regarding, of course, Michael's passing and then therefore not continuing on with Valorant. Was that your own decision, or was it just the way that it panned out that after that the opportunity just kind of fizzled out?
A little bit of both. I made absolutely no attempt to get back into Valorant professionally after that point. I mean, obviously there's a lot of stuff that happened in like the year and a half to me, like after Kicks passed, which in a lot of ways is kind of like a lost year for me, right? I wasn't well, like mental health wise. I had very low motivation. I immediately had to find a new person to cast with. Nick stepped up, huge. We're still casting together. We're having a great time. We're still improving, but it felt wrong in my eyes to try to suck him into Valorant when he wasn't a caster. Like, he's basically learning to cast on Rainbow Six, and now it's like, okay, but also I need you to learn another game. Like, it just didn't.
Even more
just didn't work that
difficult.
way.
Sorry to interject there, but even more difficult when Nick's a color commentator.
Yes, his job's a lot harder than mine.
Yeah. Whereas obviously as play-by-plays, it's a little bit.
I meant in Valorant, not in general.
Yeah. In play-by-play world, we can hop games a little bit more easily. So that makes it difficult then for Nick, where it's like, I don't even know if he plays the game or had any interest in playing the game, but
I don't know if he does.
Clearly that was not going to be as an easy transition. And then also I think probably for you and Nick, there's that focus on Rainbow Six again.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely correct. Like, my energy at the time was literally focused on like grieving and not imploding as a human being, but also putting most of my professional energy into ensuring that I stay as close to the top of Rainbow Six as possible. Because I think it's fair to say that at the time, Kix and I were the top of Rainbow Six as casters. And I think our resume showed that. Obviously, when you get a new duo, there's always risk of backsliding. And I'm a fiercely competitive person. I'd like to still cast finals. I'd like to still get the opportunities I have. So it behooves me to make sure that the person that I'm working with is as good as humanly possible. Basically, Nick trying to learn to cast in the span of a year is a pipe dream. Nobody's going to be able to do that, right? And there's like, even I was nowhere near as good in, after a year as I would be in 2021, 2022. You continue to improve. So my energy went into those two things, the personal side of it, and then the professional side, which, the whole community is grieving. I didn't want to leave Rainbow Six as well. Like, who knows what would have happened if Kix hadn't passed? Like, there was a very real shot that we would have ended up working more VCT the next year. It was a discussion that we'd had. Was it certain? No, of course not. There's a big chance we might not have worked Valorant, or maybe we started to and we realized we didn't like it anymore and just focused solely on Rainbow Six. But part of me felt it was like I was betraying the esport if I cut and run and hop over to Valorant after this has happened, because it's like, it's one thing to lose one member of talent who you've listened to for, at this point, half a decade. It's another thing to immediately lose the other on their own grounds, right? Like, the community didn't get a choice about losing Michael. But if I decide to go to Valorant, I think it feels very different. And there was a part of me that felt like I had a responsibility to kind of keep Michael's memory alive by staying in Rainbow Six and doing the best job I could. So it was just like a multitude of factors that went into it. And I just haven't really had the wherewithal to try to branch out again. And we're where we are right now. Whereas that I just focus on Rainbow Six.
So obviously we've already been kind of chatting about Michael, for those maybe unfamiliar.
It's Guzz.
Well, he is indeed.
You were referring to me as Michael when we casted
It
together.
felt very strange.
Didn't it feel weird to me?
It felt very strange. The first time I said it, I was like, oh, that's an
Michael.
odd one.
I think it's important to just take a little bit of time, obviously, to talk about Michael. I mean, obviously, we've already been doing so. And I think it's pretty clear that your history is as very much as his history. And he's so much a big part of your history that it just naturally comes out in these conversations, clearly. I mean, as any duo probably would. I mean, if I was to talk about my time in Rainbow Six, obviously, my Michael would be a big part of that.
Our Michael.
Our Michael now. We have shared him.
We have, that's true.
I've been passed around.
Obviously, you mentioned
I'll drink to that.
I'd say the first year was obviously a very difficult year, the initial shock and all of that. But in terms of where I guess you're at now, in terms of keeping his spirit alive and his memory alive and talking about Michael, I think, has that become a little bit easier with time?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really like, I mean, there's no way to say this and not sound like I'm being soulless, but it's like, I don't really get like sad about that kind of stuff. Like, definitely, like, I would say the first 3 to 5 months, maybe 6 months after he passed, it was not particularly fun to have the same conversation over and over and over again. And it's funny because I kind of discussed this with Carol, Kix's mom, about this, where she said, she goes, there's a lot of bad parts, obviously, about him passing away, but the one that irritates me the most is, she said, every time I see somebody I haven't seen in a while, it's just that conversation over and over and over again. Like, hey, really sorry to hear about your son. Obviously it's significantly worse for her because that was her kid and he was, a very good friend of mine and a coworker. But for about the next 6 months to a year, and even still to this day, there were people in Atlanta who came up to me and would say like, hey, I'm really sorry to say this, but I'm really sorry about Michael. It's been years at this point. But it's not bad now. It's nice now. But at the time, the absolute last thing I wanted to do was have this conversation multiple times a week. And I know that for them, it's important because he meant a lot to a lot of people. So in a lot of ways, like, I'm like this totem of him, right? Like, I'm like his living memory. So to them, it's important that they discuss it. But to me, it's like, I've had this conversation 1,000 times at this point. It's not irritating, but it's just like, I was so over talking about it because it was emotionally exhausting. Every single time it was like, I really appreciate that. Thank you. That's really nice of you. Let's talk about something else. Because I just don't want to relive it time and time again. It's tough. But I mean, in a lot of ways, it's really nice. And it's a nice reminder that when we go, places, and I have no doubt he was huge in Brazil. Brazil loved him. When we went to Sao Paulo, he got mobbed when he stepped out of the casting booth. We were in Rio, which at the time was our biggest event. I think this one's going to eclipse it. We went upstairs to check out the merch booth. There was no official meet and greet for us because they didn't feel that the English talent had enough of a fan base in Brazil to warrant a meet and greet. So when we did Rio, there was no formal signing, nothing. We leave our dungeon because we were casting in a booth under the arena because obviously the in-house language is going to be Portuguese. We went upstairs to the merch booth. We hadn't even taken probably 10 steps off of the elevator. And people swarmed him. And we had to get a member of staff, like, pull him out because we were about to be late to cast our match. So I have no doubt that when we go to the arena here in Sao Paulo, there will be people who will come up to me and say, like, I'll have that conversation again. Like, Kix meant a lot to me. And now it's at the point where it's not irritating. It's really nice because it's a constant reminder then. Then it was a constant reminder of him not being here. But now it's a constant reminder of when he was here, how much he meant to people and how much people still think about him.
My only final question on this sort of topic would be, obviously, now you're casting with Nick or Pengu. How proud are you of him to be, I don't want to say filling Kix's shoes because I feel like that's a cruel way to say it, but
Kix had big feet too.
Well, yeah.
Much bigger than Nick's.
Obviously, so incredibly difficult for him to step into that role. And I don't think there's probably anybody else in the world or in the community that could have done it. Now that we're in 2024, you guys are still together. How do you reflect on that working out as well as it has?
I mean, I genuinely don't think anybody else could have done what he did. I did the stream announcing him as my duo before we ended up working Yavla, which was an event I was very, very certain I was not going to work. And then at the last minute, I changed my mind. And I basically said to Nick, like, there's like 3 key points that I need whoever replaces him, which again, I think is, the incorrect...
I don't know what else.
No, I know what you're saying. I know what you're saying. I don't take it that way, but I know what you're saying. But basically, like, somebody is going to need to fill his shoes to an extent, right? I said, there needs to be somebody who, first and foremost, the community knows, respects, and likes. That's the biggest thing. Because to Michael, it's not necessarily about what he brought to the broadcast. It was that familiarity. People loved him not because he was a good caster. He was, but they loved him, I think, because of his personality. And I think Nick is in kind of that same boat. Nick obviously had a lot of haters because of his time on Penta and G2.
Shaco.
And, and he also got Shaco banned, directly. He called John Ubisoft and got Shaco banned. That's just the story, right? But I think they needed somebody who they could trust and immediately feel comfortable with. Number 2, it needed to be somebody who had game knowledge, right? As you pointed out, like, being a color caster is not an easy job. And even still this day, there's not a lot of people out there who know this game at that high of a level to step in. And then number 3, it needs to be somebody who I know. And Nick filled all three of those categories. You know, I knew Nick. I wasn't particularly close with him, but we'd hung out a bunch at events. We'd spoken, we'd talked before, you know, and he's somebody that like ultimately like I knew I could trust. I knew the community could trust, and I knew he could do the job justice. I knew that it would necessitate a big change in how I approached casting because once again, Kix and I had that hybrid model, but Nick hit the ground running. We tried to do a couple practice casts before Yavla, but I couldn't do it. I couldn't stomach it. I just kept kicking that can down the road, which in retrospect was a terrible fucking idea because I had no idea how Nick was going to do as a caster. So we get to Yavla and suddenly we're casting for the first time ever in the group stages of a major, which is it's a very bad idea. And I thought he did a good job. I mean, was it easy? No, it wasn't. It was really emotional. It was really challenging. I wanted to call him Michael like 1,000 times in the broadcast. But the improvement he made just at that event alone, I thought was incredible. And then we go to Sweden and we do SI. And we went to Sweden and they said, we're not going to decide who's doing the finals. I thought in my mind 1,000%. It's not going to be Nick and I. We've only casted together like 24 times at this point. But Ubisoft thought that the improvement that he made from his first cast in Yavla to like one of the latter casts he did in Stockholm warranted a grand finals. His growth alone in that period was incredible, and he just keeps improving. Now, if only, Nick, if you're watching this, if only he spoke a little bit slower, I think he could achieve a whole other level. But no, I mean, I think he's been doing excellent. And for somebody who's not like hardwired to be a caster, his development's been great. It took Kix years to get to the level he was at, for crying out loud. It's insane to think that Pengu would do it any faster.
I had the pleasure. I mean, we obviously both had the pleasure during this event to work with not only yourself but also with Nick, and I was actually just absolutely blown away in the match that we did in terms of him as a caster. Not so much his analysis, because clearly we all know he knows the game better than most people.
Yeah.
But just his casting ability, picking up on throws, his timings, really, really impressed me when working with him. So, yeah, he's obviously come a long way. I wasn't ready to probably move on from Kix just yet. He's gone a little early.
We can revisit. I believe we love the term. We can circle back.
We can circle back. I'm going to circle back.
And then we got to run it up
because it's the Jake and Guzz show. So
we'll do a pivot. We'll do a creative
pivot. We are going to pivot.
There's a pivot.
Not for too much longer, but I just kind of had like two final little thoughts that I wanted to touch on. Firstly, I guess, just the final takeaways from obviously Michael's passings in terms of life lessons for you individually, because I've never had to deal with grief like that in terms of losing someone that close to me at a young age. I think obviously as I've gotten older and I've turned 30, unfortunately I've had older members of family pass away, for example, and that's one level of grief. But I think in terms of the instant shock of just out of nowhere for someone so young, that's obviously a very difficult thing to go through. What were some of just the life lessons you've picked up since then, as you've been obviously getting a bit wiser and older and such?
Well, I've been getting older. I don't know if I'm getting wiser.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's the nicest thing you said at this event.
You guys have worked with me this week. You know that I'm not getting any wiser. Let's not kid ourselves here, but it's funny because it kind of ties into what I assume is coming later from what I've saw of the run of show, where it's the biggest life lesson that I've learned, which sounds so cliche, is that like life really is fleeting. Surround yourself by the people you love and remind them of that, and spend as much time with them as possible. Right. And this was something that I kind of lost track of in the 2 years that I lived out west in Western Canada, and then obviously in Poland, was that I basically lived a nomadic life for over half a decade. I was away from friends, I was away from family, and, you know, people moved away. There are people, you know, that I used to spend a ton of time with in 2013 who I haven't seen since, because I moved away and then I moved even farther to Europe, and people have kids and people are busy. And, you know, it's like that old saying that gets passed around like on Boomer Facebook, where it's like, you know, one day you were hanging out at the park with your friend Johnny and you said, you know, like, oh, I'll see you tomorrow.
I'll see you tomorrow.
And then you never did. Yeah. And that was the
last. You never know when the last time will be.
Yeah. And I mean, I know it sounds silly, but it's like, it's true. And I've been decoupling myself from social media for a number of reasons. You know, the big ones are, most of them are that it's, you know, made me a lot more miserable being on social media. So I'm trying to stay away from it. The other is that it's overrun with Nazis, but that's a whole other conversation.
I don't think we had a political section in this podcast. Maybe we'll have to.
Which remains a mistake.
We'll have to do another one.
You know me. But, I've been trying to spend more time offline with people who matter, which, you know, is silly because in this job I've made friends all over the world, and I online there are people that matter to me too. But Michael's passing is a reminder that things can change literally in an instant. I was in his final stream. I resubbed to him an hour and a half before he went on that drive. You know, like it was not like we hadn't spoken in a while. We spoke every day. You know, I went into his stream. I resubbed to him. I made fun of him for being nominated for the Esports Awards. He told me to go fuck myself, and then that was it. And I think, realistically, I think that was the last thing he ever said to me. And it's funny because it's so on brand for our friendship and the relationship that he and I had. But it's just like, what's to say that that same set of circumstances that ultimately would befall Michael couldn't, you know, happen to another close friend of mine or a family member? And you never know when is the last time you're going to be able to talk to somebody. So spend time actually talking to people and tell the people around you how much they matter to you, and don't shy away from being honest, and don't shy away from seeing them. And again, I know it sounds super cliche, and I don't think it's profound by any stretch of the imagination, but it was a good reminder because we had just come through COVID where we spent a lot of time kind of isolated and not talking to each other. And it was a great reminder, and it's a reminder that I try to hold on to now of, you know, there are days where people invite me out and I don't think I have the energy. And then I say to myself, you'll be fine. It's just another day. Go see your friends. And I think it's something that honestly, like, a lot of people could probably benefit from.
Really well said. I think the last thing is probably a little bit more controversial, and I'm going off the cuff here in terms of this question because
I like this already.
It's one that I actually just noticed quite a lot of in terms of Rainbow Six community in regards to Michael. One comment I see quite a lot of, and I'm just kind of curious, I'm also your perspective on it, is typically the bad mouthing of other talent. And then it's in relation to, oh, but I miss Kix, as in the fact that Kix was so great, which he was. Yeah. No one's debating that. There's no question there. But using it and his memory in regards to bringing others down, which I personally think is just incredibly disrespectful. I want your thoughts on that. If you've seen it, if you see it, if it's something that's come across your desk.
I saw it today. Like at 2 hours before we went live, there was a thread on the subreddit about like caster knowledge. And there was some fucking brickhead said something like, I can't believe we lost Kix, and like, this is what we're left with. And I'm just like, fuck off. Like, I don't want people like that in our esport. Like, it's not like a trade. It's not like, you know, it's not like we're trading out. It's not like we're trading out casters.
This is not the NHL fantasy, mate.
It's not the hockey fantasy that you keep talking about.
That's not it. It's not, you know, Jesse and I have been playing fantasy hockey, and we've been trying to come up with a trade for like a week and a half, and it's been dominating our friendship. But no, it's just like, I don't think you need to lose one to gain another, or, you know, lose one and value another one less. Like, at the end of the day, like, Kix fought a lot for us expanding our casting roster, and he would gladly give advice and feedback to people. You know, obviously he had his same frustrations as I do with the fact that we don't have a lot of like color casters, right? And it's a really tough job. So to the people who do step up and might not necessarily be a color caster, but do try to do that job, and that's something that like I did with you. Like when you and I casted together this week, like we kind of swapped off a lot, where it's like you would do color one round, I would do color one round. It's not as easy as you'd think. And I think it's really easy to sit in the cheap seats and just sling shit around because you are some random, nameless, faceless piece of trash. And if you're using Kix's memory to sully the reputation of somebody else, then I think the words that Kix would use to that person would be things that I can't say on this podcast.
Well, you could test the limits if you want.
I choose not to get banned.
Okay, that's fine.
But I would tell you right now, Kix would not want his memory to be used to bring down other people. He knew how hard this job was. He knew how much scrutiny people open themselves up to by being in a public-facing job. As silly as it sounds, because we talk about a video game, we are still public figures to thousands, to tens of thousands, to even hundreds of thousands of people. And, you know, I find it funny when people will pick apart a single sentence or two that you say over the span of a couple hours, when it's like, I have said probably hundreds of thousands of words over all of the hours I've casted this game. Yeah, I'm bound to say some stupid shit. Everybody is. Even the greatest commentators in the world are going to have the same hiccups. So I think it's incredibly improper when people use his memory and his skill to bring down other people, because that's the absolute last thing he would want, and it's the last thing he would tolerate.
Well, I do apologize for bringing a little bit of negativity there. But
Fuck those people.
Fuck those people. And yeah, I think that it's just one that's always been, at least individually for me, one I've noticed.
Drink to that.
I've noticed quite a lot, and I just irks me a lot. So either way,
just one thing to follow up on.
Go on.
People will then turn around and say that, you know, we're thin-skinned for reading these comments and responding to these comments because we should be above it. But I think that's the wrong way to look at it. Part of what makes esports great is how accessible it is. If you're Joe Buck or, you know, Doc Emmerich, or you're one of these great American commentators, you're not reading social media to, you know, at all. You get paid a fortune to go cast a professional game, and then you go about your daily life. There's no community around the NFL. There's no community around the NHL. But our esport, and all esports, lives and dies off of the community around it. Part of what makes esports so great is that people can DM us and we can answer them. We all stream. People can pop into our streams and have conversations with us. People can come up to us at events and talk to us and give us feedback. That's part of what makes esports esports. So yeah, sure, I can stop using social media entirely. All of us could. But I think ultimately it would erode one of the best parts of this job. So yeah, of course I'm going to go on Reddit and read the Reddit threads. Yeah, of course I'm going to go on Twitter and see my mentions, because there's a lot of good in there and there's a lot of stuff worth talking about. But then every now and then you get some fucking idiot who just shits their opinion on social media, and it's tough. I think that we're ripe for scrutiny, and I have no problem with feedback, especially negative feedback. I think it can be good sometimes to have like a sober second set of eyes to tell you when you're doing something wrong. But I think people should really handle themselves better online. And I don't think a solution to that is that we stop using social media. I think the solution is to expect people to be better people.
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the hard-skinned comment, naturally casters are. I think because you essentially have to be. If you're not, and I've had the unfortunate pleasure of seeing certain casters at back home who maybe are not as experienced, and they're in the Twitch chats and they're in the Reddit and they see things, and then they obviously let that get to them. I mean, that's probably not quite where I was going for, is more to do with just the use of KiXSTAR's memory and name. That to me, I mean, hard skin, soft skin, doesn't really matter. Just don't do it. You can say I'm fucking shit. You can say that Guzz doesn't know the game. You can say that Parker's going on some wild tangent. But
you'd probably be right.
All correct.
All correct.
All correct.
All correct. Well, and we'll transition now and away from negativity in that regard to probably negativity in another regard, which is the state of Rainbow Six Esports as of right now. For a multitude of reasons, I guess, in the game, Super Defender sided in terms of the broadcasts. Is it where it needs to be? Maybe not. Not for this to be a slinging match in terms of this is where this could be fixed, or where this could be fixed, or this is shocking, or this is bad. But more so where things could be improved, and looking towards the positive aspects of how can we improve Rainbow Six Esports in this current day and age.
I mean, this is, you don't want me to go on tangents, but you can't give me such an open-ended question.
It's a juicy question.
It's also a very careful one, because I think obviously as us as talent, you can't shit talk your employer. I can't say to you guys at home.
I should have gotten that memo years ago.
Have
you watched my podcast?
I mean, you can. We have to be a bit more careful.
Yeah, we've probably got to be a little bit more careful. And it's not really about shitting on the employers per se, because we're all one team. That's the way I sort of look to our job, is that those who are the developers, Ubisoft, those who are the tournament organizers, Blast, and those who are the talent, should all be one cohesive unit to try and improve the product.
Ideally is the case. I think that I think criticism is important, and I know from all the dealings I've had with Ubisoft, and obviously I can't speak to Blast because my experience with Blast have been quite small. We've only worked with them for technically less than a year. I think
correct.
I think we hit the 1 year mark sometime in like mid-March. But I can speak from both Faceit and ESL's perspective, from with whom I worked for many, many years. Ubisoft and the devs in particular love feedback, but they like good feedback. And I think the problem is that maybe some casters, I think usually we're better when it comes to this, but a lot of pro players and a lot of like community figures, whether it be like a YouTuber or a Twitch streamer or whatever, they're very unfair with their criticisms, right? Like at the end of the day, there are real human beings who work on this product, whether it be developing the game, whether it be, running the esport, whether it be casting. And people, I think, forget that. And they just kind of, like I said, they just kind of shit their opinions out. And I think there is a way to kind of use your language where you can say like, Lion is, let's go back to when Lion was horrendously broken. You can go about it and say like, I think Lion's overtuned. I think there's a couple ways to fix him. I think these would be reasonable solutions. Or you could say, why are these fucking dumb fucks making operators this overpowered? What the fuck is wrong with Ubisoft? Why would they fucking do this? Everybody who plays this game is every dev who plays this game is a fucking idiot. They should have known that Lion was overpowered. They're fucking stupid. I think ultimately your point is the same. It's the language that you use, obviously, that makes a huge difference. And I've done play tests with Ubisoft, and I've been quite scathing with my critique in private. And they've been very receptive to it and have made changes based on that. But I think it's a maturity thing. People who don't really know how to interact with other people, people who have limited social skills, people who don't have a lot of real world experience, people who have never been a part of a team, don't really know how to formulate their thoughts properly. And I think ultimately it works against us. My frustration with where Rainbow Six is at right now is that I don't think there's an identity as to whether they want this to be a casual game or a competitive game. And I said this earlier on. I think we've really benefited from the balance cell that I think it's in Barcelona.
Yep.
We've really benefited from the balance cell, and huge shout out to them for some of the changes they've made. But then other times I'll read the patch notes and I will think as well, immediately, my first thought will be, do they even play this game? Why are they making this change? Now that's reactionary thinking, and I've been wrong before, and I've cooled off, and I've actually tried it. And in practice, it makes a lot more sense than in theory. But I think the big issue right now that we have is there's no reason in my mind why Azami has not been nerfed. There's no reason in my mind why Solus has not been nerfed. Nick and I literally talked about it on the broadcast today, that a great way to make Solus less omnipresent is to just make it so her ability doesn't work in prep phase. Number one, it weakens her, but more importantly, and I think this is the bigger issue that people who don't know the game well enough don't consider, is that you are effectively punished for droning. You shouldn't want to discourage people from droning in prep phase. If anything, it's the opposite. You should be encouraging people to drone in prep phase. But Solus is a direct deterrent from doing that. Because if you drone, it is so easy, especially in lower elo, to kill 4 or 5 drones in prep phase. And suddenly now the attackers have 5 drones for the remainder of the round and you're completely fucked. Right? So it's like, I look at it and I'm like, why has that's such a simple change. Why not do that? Just try it. And I get frustrated because I'm like, you go on the Rainbow Six subreddit, not the Pro League subreddit, the regular subreddit, and there are posts still saying that Solus is underpowered. And I don't get it. There's a huge disconnect. So my frustration is it doesn't seem like there's like a cohesive identity to this game. If you want it to be a competitive esport, which it already is, then you kind of need to focus on that a little bit more than they are. If you want it to be a casual game, that's also okay. The esport will probably survive. But I think right now, they're trying to sit on the fence, which I understand. But as somebody who wants the competitive side to be better, it frustrates me.
I think to use examples there as well, when you think of Counter-Strike, you think competitive game.
Yeah.
Balanced for competitiveness. Valorant as well. I think when you kind of look at League of Legends, they clearly have a very large casual player base. That's quite evident. But a lot of their balancing and changes is actually pertaining to its competitiveness in the competitive scene.
Sometimes. They have
Sometimes.
There are a lot of champs in League.
To be fair, League of Legends is a very difficult game to please both worlds. When it comes to Rainbow Six, though, it doesn't, at least to me, at times feel like the decisions that get made are consistent.
Yes.
In its approach. And so some patches it's like, this is for esports and this is going to help for competitiveness, and in other patches it's like, let's throw all that out the window and help the casuals out. And then that makes it very difficult and you get this very janky experience. But I think in terms of where Rainbow Six is at right now, probably more so pertaining to the esports scene and the structure behind it, and the gameplay is clearly affected by the very heavily defender-sided meta that we currently see. If that were to get fixed, and the issue is then you also don't want to swing the other way and we end up with like 60% attacker win rate rounds, because then that's the same thing. We've never had that. Do we want that?
I mean, I'd be down to try it. I think the part that really chaps my ass the most, and I don't know if you guys feel this, is that prior to the introduction of Tubarão and prior to making grenades effectively useless, the game was in my opinion, the best balanced state it's ever been in.
Up to that point, yes. I agree.
So we look at the game where it's so many operators are viable. Defenders are not overpowered. It's relatively balanced. There are maps that are attacker favored. There are bomb sites that are attacker favored. There are bomb sites that are defender favored. But then you nerf frag grenades, which admittedly, the lack of counterplay from a grenade below was frustrating. In my eyes, you get rid of the yellow pings. In comp, that solves this issue. They didn't want to do that. They want yellow pings to stick around, so they nerf the nades. Then they introduce yet another very strong defender. And now you've gone from what I felt was one of the most enjoyable metas we've ever been in a very well-balanced state of the game, to one of the worst places that I feel this game has been in the last 5 years. I lived through the Lion meta. I lived through the Glaz Ying meta. I lived through the 20-second meta. I lived through the Mute Mozzie meta. None of those were fun to play in. But we were in such a good place. It feels like a huge step back with these changes. And I mean, obviously the reveal panel will have been out by the time this goes live. So hopefully we get a good idea of some changes that are coming out. Ideally, there are ways to curb the power of defense. But as of right now, I feel very frustrated because it feels like we were heading in the right direction and we took a step back.
I guess just jumping in on that point, I don't believe you were there at the time, but we did get to see
I know everything in it.
Yeah, so we all know what's going to happen. We saw the reveal. By the time this video comes out, it will be live. It does seem
Lion gets every ability in the game.
It does seem like a lot of the targeted changes for Season 1 and then with the Solace changes 2 and 3 that it might help a bit. Goes back to, though, that discussion of are these things, too slow? And then when they are implemented, are they too harsh? I'm not entirely sure. As well, to pick up on the point in terms of identity crisis, I've definitely felt that as well. I will say in that season reveal, I think the language is very deliberate. They said competitive, I think, multiple times, which I don't remember them ever saying. And tactical was also, that fucking tactical buzzword was used a ton as well. So
I don't know if you know this, it is a tactical game.
I could have a 3-hour podcast on talking about that word and how the community has misconstrued it.
Shall we?
I don't think we have that long. I don't think we brought it
maybe another episode with more beers and a glass of red wine could be the play.
I don't know where I'm going with this point. I'm just yapping.
No, that's fine. That's fine. You're just talking for the sake of talking.
I feel like I have to add something to this show. So
you do, by setting everything up and doing all the behind the scenes work, which does go unnoticed to those that don't get to watch. But I notice. Very quickly, as we look to obviously start to wind things down here, I want your thoughts on TriCasting, simply put.
I think for a game like Siege, it makes a lot of sense. I think for the way that we currently have our talent roster laid out, it doesn't really make a lot of sense. I think that with Rainbow Six, there's only real need for a play-by-play for about 30 seconds. 30 seconds to maybe 45 seconds of a round is hardcore play-by-play. The other 2 to 2.5 to 3 minutes, depending on the prep phase and stuff like that, and the operator pick phase, is mostly going to be color work. When we did the TriCast in Atlanta, it was excellent. But that's because Nick is a hard color, and Dev has been on the analyst desk probably more than he's been casting at this point. So we brought in somebody in Dev who's a tremendous caster and also a tremendous analyst. analyst who knows how to do both jobs. And he can come in, and there are some rounds where he did a lot of play-by-play. And there were some rounds where he'd do a lot of analysis work as a color caster. And it allowed me to focus solely on play-by-play. I loved it. I'm not a color caster. I know this game well, but I'm not always able to articulate it because that's not where my head is at. And as time has gone on and I've spent more time working with Nick, I've been burrowing more and more into play-by-play because unlike Kix, Nick doesn't do play-by-play. So that allows me to stretch my legs and focus more on how am I going to call this action, which means that I don't need to focus on the why is this action happening and what could potentially happen down the road. I love the idea of tricasts, and I'd like us to do more of them. The problem is that I don't think we have enough bona fide color casters. We have a lot of duos in the scene where the color caster is basically like a play-by-play caster who does a little bit of analysis, and that's it. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think that makes it a challenge when you look at a tricast, because the benefit of a tricast is that you're actually analyzing what's happening the appropriate amount of time, because most of the round is discovery and setup. The actual execution, which the play-by-play does, is a small fraction of it.
We do a lot of tricasting back home in Australia, and I think we're very fortunate to be able to do that because, strangely enough, we are actually the region that has the most color commentary. When you've got Mandy, you've got James, you've got Michael, and then I am the hardcore play-by-play that gets to just be shared around, which is a lot of fun.
Strange way to word that, but sure.
I think
We'll drink to that.
I agree that I think tricasting has its place. My intriguing thought on it typically is how it gets utilized, where you go through, say, groups or playoffs and it's not really used, and then bam, grand final, it's a tricast. And that's great, and that's exciting, and that's fun, and I think you guys did a tremendous job, and I think James absolutely killed it, and I cannot believe that he obviously is not here for Six Invitational, but that's a rant for another day. But the fact that it's not something that's, I guess, perfected, that's not something that's practiced, probably then has its flaws at times. From tricasts I've seen in other titles, I agree. I think you typically want to have essentially two color. I think if in an ideal world, the setup that you had at Atlanta, where you have the hard play-by-play, you then have a mix. So like a James, for example, Dev Marta, where he can do a little bit of both. And then obviously that kind of hard color, hard analysis, I think makes it. And as you said, I don't know if Rainbow Six can then do that regularly enough. Then there's the money aspect of it as well. It costs more.
Oh, who fucking
in terms of 3 to 2. Well,
good products cost money.
I'm just saying, we live in a world, we live in an industry where we already have so many esports that are clearly not doing so well.
We live in a capitalist hellscape where everything we love is commodified based on the money that it makes and the money that it costs, and it ruins everything we love.
It is interesting you made a point there as well about Nick regarding the fact that he doesn't do the play-by-play. When I had the pleasure of working with him, I'm a very selfless play-by-play. I like to throw. I don't like to go for, say, more than 30 seconds. I don't.
Nobody should.
I don't like to hog the mic. I think it's really. I find it really jarring when I hear someone talk for like more than 50 seconds at the very least.
Yeah.
Maybe you can get away with 40 seconds on a super engaging, like, say the last 40 seconds of a round, for example, or say a retake scenario in terms of diffusing. Nick, though, I throw to him with, like, say, maybe 20 seconds left. And I'm like, okay, you can have this play-by-play moment. I don't care. I really do not care. And he just throws it back instantly. And it's like, no, you do this. You're the play-by-play. And I'm just like, okay, no worries. He didn't say those words, to be exact, but it was the way in which I've thrown to him. And it's that kind of throw where it's like, okay, you take this one because it's just worked out that way. That's just sometimes how a round may go. And obviously we had that experience. Yeah. And he basically said all of maybe 3 words and was like, and then that was it. And it was straight back to me. And I was like, okay, cool. I'm not used to that because I allow Guzz to have, allow, as if it's...
You permit him.
Gives me the permission.
How gracious of you.
How gracious.
I feel honored.
You should be lucky.
I don't like doing play-by-play. You know that. So.
No, I know you don't like it, but I think it's a really good skill to be able to do a little bit of both. But we live in a world in terms of Rainbow Six where we probably need more color. So keep doing color.
I think the big thing with play-by-play, and this is the struggle I had with Kix, was there'd be lots of times where action is often unpredictable. You can have 1 or 2 deaths come with 50 seconds to go, and then the other 7 deaths will come in the final 5 seconds. How do you pace that? right? Because it could break out at any point.
Yeah.
So the greater issue that I often had was my mind is I'm a play-by-play. I'm thinking about how I'm going to play-by-play this. I'm thinking about how I'm going to approach casting this. I'm not thinking, hey, I should keep a really sharp eye on everything that's occurring because I'm going to need to break it down. So there would be times where Michael would ultimately, not you, other Michael. So there'd be times where it'd be like 50 seconds left and he'd just hang on to it. And all those 50 seconds would be constant action. Then diffuser would go down. Now there's another 45 seconds. He's been talking for a minute and a half at this point. But I'm not looking at like what's happening. So now he'd throw to me and now I'm the color, but that's not where my head's been at. Right. And I think Nick is kind of in that same boat where Nick wants to like kind of take a bigger like overlook and then discuss it. And if he's doing any play-by-play, it's distracting him from what he wants to, and I think he needs to do, which is explain like the why, the where, the when, etc. I don't know if you find it the same.
I just don't play by play.
These Heinekens have made me burpy.
I mean, from my perspective, I just try to stay in my lane as much as possible. Obviously, it's very difficult because Siege is dynamic, especially if you have a pretty lengthy execute, which can definitely happen in this meta as well. It's not as snappy as it probably once was. Then if the plant goes down, there's also that possibility that it goes on for another 45 fucking seconds. Like that can extend out really, really far. And that just isn't comparative to like a Counter-Strike execute is half that time. Even an Overwatch fucking team fight is probably half that time. So like, it's really, really difficult to balance those metrics. But I'm definitely a firm believer that Siege can and probably should have firmer roles than it probably generally does. But it's not for me to
I think
be the authority on.
Our basic rule of thumb, at least, is usually at about, say, 60 seconds left in the round. There's still a little bit of that pre-execute setup. That's when I'd say I'd throw to him. He can then go over kind of what's happening or what might happen. 30 seconds left, he throws back. That's the very general way of going about it. As we know in Siege, that's not always how it goes. I could throw to him with a minute left and then bam, a blitz rushes in and it's a plan and it's go, go, go. Yeah. And he needs to be able to do that very short amount of play-by-play to eventually then get to a position where he can throw to me naturally. If he is like making an analytical point and then just stops because there's play-by-play, like that's going to be very jarring. So you need to be able to have some of that skill. And it also goes for us as play-by-plays where we need to be analytical during those early prep phases. So you've got to be able to do a bit of both. And then I think that's what leads to that hybrid casting that we see. Obviously, Des and Ace are very renowned for that, for example. And then that's where it's very easy to slip into that. But for me, the natural pairing of a play-by-play and a color, I personally think is the right way to go about it.
I mean, the way that I see Rainbow Six is that you need to have two people who are good enough at color commentary and at least one who's good at play-by-play. You know, you need to basically have two color commentators, one of whom can play-by-play. In a perfect world, that's how Rainbow Six duos should be structured because, as I said, so much of the round is going to be like color commentary work, right? It's explaining why people are doing the setups they're doing. It's explaining why operators were picked. It's explaining how people are droning, how they're taking map control. Because even now in the defender-sided meta we're looking at now, it's very easy in some of these rounds for nothing to happen for 2.5 minutes. What the hell are you going to play-by-play? The drone? Like, you can't do that, right? And it's funny because I actually found casting Valorant a lot easier in that regard. Yep. You know what's going to happen when it's going to happen. And when Kix and I casted Valorant, we talked about this. We both kind of said, like, hybrid doesn't work in this game. So if you go back and listen to any of our VCT casts, Kix did almost no play-by-play at all. Whereas then we come back to Rainbow Six and he'd be doing a lot more play-by-play because he wanted to. And depending on the way that the round goes, we just roll with it, right?
Well, look to unwind a little bit here. We've got the very apt title of Future Aspirations in and out of esports. Obviously, we're not getting any younger. I've just crossed the 30-year-old threshold.
You're in your 30s?
Oh, well, I like to think I'm not in my 30s until I'm 31. Because right now I'm just 30.
Yeah, can you settle this debate? Is he in his 30s despite being only 30?
Fuck. He's not. His first year starts when he hits 31.
Which is actually in around the time this comes out.
So
unironically, it could actually be out on my birthday.
This is actually quite funny. There was his second episode of Jeopardy ever, Alex Trebek. did the final Jeopardy was this was the first date of the 19th century. Or no, it was the 20th century. And everybody said January 1st, 1900. January 1st, 1901, because technically that's year 0. You're not in the first year until the first day of the first year, which is 1901.
There you go.
So he's technically not in his 30s until he's 31.
And by the time this episode comes out, roughly.
Back to the point of the actual question. Future goals, aspirations.
Survive.
Like cryogenesis in a freezing tube.
I'm open to solutions.
Live for thousands of years.
I'm open to solutions.
Well, what about pertaining to esports and where you see yourself, I guess, over the next couple of years? Or is it a 1 year at a time outlook?
I think with esports, you can have a framework for where you want to be, but you need to be flexible, right? Because, no offense, but back in 2017, I didn't think I'd still be in this esports 7 years later. I wasn't really thinking that far ahead. You just kind of roll with it, right? And that's part of one of the shittier things of this esport. Because now it's like I'm turning 34 this year. At some point I'd like to, buy a house, have a family, settle down. But amidst the backdrop of economic and climate insecurity, you also have that same thing with our industry in particular. And it's like, there's nothing to stop them from pulling the plug on Rainbow Six Esports in a year or two. What if the game dies in a year and a half? Look at all the people that 4 years ago thought that the Overwatch League was going to be the single greatest esport that's ever been made. Look at Heroes of the Storm. They were promised that it would be going on and then, for another year. And then suddenly they get an email 2 months later, basically saying, hey, so actually there's going to be no more esports. See you later. We have no job security. And while our skills can, transfer over to other industries and other jobs, for a lot of people, especially people who got this job through playing, they don't have any formal education or other skills to fall back on. That's scary. So for me, it's, I feel like I did a pretty good job building up a brand. I feel like I am a relatively known quantity in Rainbow Six and hopefully in other esports. And I like to think that if Rainbow Six was to stop or I was to suddenly, change my mind about working in this industry, that I'd be able to find another job relatively, quickly. But I can't bet on that, just like I can't bet on this job lasting forever. And we're kidding ourselves if we think that esports is for old people. It's not. Like the joke is that like when you hit 24 years old, you get put on hard breach and you're about ready to retire. God, what about us who are in our 30s? Well, sorry, I'm in my 30s. You're not yet, technically. We established that. But it's like, I find it harder to relate to the players in the community with every single event. Because when I first started casting, I was 27 and it felt like most of the players were 22, 23, 24. It's not a huge age gap there. But now a lot of these teams are like 18, 19, 20. And I'm a full 13 years older than these kids. And I just find like now, even like with community reception, it's like, I'm old. I'm not one of those like hype beast TikTok Zoomers that, have started to show up on every esports. I wear fucking turtlenecks and boots. Like, I'm just not like, I'm not the target audience. And when somebody in esports sees me on the screen, am I too old? Will one day like Ubisoft or Blast turn around and be
Pat
like,
on the shoulder?
Yeah, they'd be like, it's time to go.
Time's up.
Yeah. So
off to the retirement village.
You just got to take it day by day. And I think that also kind of goes back to the thing that we talked about with the lessons learned, from KiXSTAR's passing, is that nothing is certain, whether that be interpersonal relationships, whether that be family, whether that be work. And it's never a bad thing to have a backup plan.
Very, very quickly on that, because I think it's, and we're at this point now where we can kind of just yap a little bit, but
it's my favorite part.
The thing for me is esports is still relatively young as an industry. Yeah. And so therefore when it began, admittedly, I've worked with talent that are in their 40s that are still going. And you think about talent that maybe started in the late 2000s, early 10s, for example, would now very much be in said 40s. And I think as this industry progresses and continues, at least in terms of the talent side of thing, I think it will become far more common that the talent are older. As you kind of go and look at, say, sports, for example, you look at those commentators and they're in their 50s, 60s, some even in their 70s, believe it or not. And so I think that in terms of, I get your point, obviously, where the relation, say, with the players, I mean, that's changed dramatically for myself. I started at 23, I'm now 30, turning 31. And I remember when I started, it was all about relationship with the players. I'm at these events, I'm at these LANs, I'm talking with the players, I'm hanging out, we're going out partying, we're drinking. I'm just not that person anymore. Yeah. And so I now spend more of my time, say, with the talent, for example, and then the other older individuals.
You don't like to drink anymore? What?
Well, I mean... drink sensibly.
I'll drink to that.
Yeah, I'll drink to that. But that's, I think that's my view on it. I don't know, though. For all I know, we could get the little tap on the shoulder saying, no, we need this to be a young man's game.
I think that your talent should be a pretty accurate representation of your viewership and your player base, right? And that's why I think for certain games it's so striking, and I hate to say this because people are going to say, like, oh, he's woke, whatever. But I think that's why it's so striking that like the vast majority of esports is still dominated by like white guys. Whereas it's like women and people of color represent a huge amount of people who play these games, like well into the double digits. And that's just, that representation is not seen on the broadcast. When you look at a game like Valorant, or you look at a game like Fortnite, or you look at a game like Rocket League, these games tend to skew younger. Rainbow Six's audience is actually quite old. You know, I remember talking to one of the devs at one point, and obviously I can't say it now because I signed an NDA, but I was surprised with the average age of like obviously this
the
is
demographic.
Do we want to play over under? Or
no, I'm not even
not at liberty.
But because I got this information under NDA, and I'm not keen to, you know, have John Ubisoft sue my family. But I was stunned with what the average age of the person who plays this game is. It was much older than I thought. But then it's like, there are esports where if everybody who watches and plays the game is young, it seems a little jarring if the people who are talking about it don't represent that demographic. And frankly, you know, you see content made for some of these games like Fortnite, for example, the Fortnite esport. And it's like, I could not go over there and cast that game because the audience wouldn't appreciate my sense of humor. It's older. I don't think they'd appreciate some of my phrases. I'm even like, Fox is young, Laxing is young, like even Nick is young, and they're making references along with links that it's just like, I don't know what the fuck they're talking about. And they're like, oh, it's on TikTok. Oh, it's this YouTube video. Oh, it's this thing. And there's Zoomer memes. I am so far past that. So for me, like, if you want your broadcast to do well in a lot of ways, you need your broadcasters to kind of speak the language of your audience and your community. And it's like, I don't speak the language of people who play Fortnite. I don't speak the language of people who could beat an FGC either. So I couldn't go over to fighting games. But I do kind of wonder, as you pointed out, will those viewers age with the esport? Because my experience in Rainbow Six hasn't exactly been that. Yes, we are an older community, but the people I know who are now starting to get into their 30s that watched the esport 5 years ago don't anymore. They've moved on, they've grown up, and they're doing other things. And they're not going to esport events. They're not watching the game the way they were when they were 24, 25, 26. This is all, of course, speculation. I would like to.
Well,
I would like to keep my job. So I would like.
In an ideal world, you're wrong.
I hope so.
In your speculation.
I hope that I'm wrong. And I mean, look at Dota. A lot of the Dota talent is older. Even some of the CSGO guys are, you know, in their 30s to late 30s.
Well, because it's a very, it's an old esport. If you think about Dota,
an old esport, and the people who watch it are old.
I'm pretty sure the Counter-Strike talent I mean, I could be completely wrong here, are essentially like at minimum like mid 30s.
Launders and I are the same age. I think Scrawny is younger than us. I want to say Harry and Hugo are younger than us.
I think Harry and Hugo are probably one of the older, younger.
I would guess
duo.
late 20s for them.
I think Harry and Hugo are young, but like Machine is older.
Sponge is mid 30s, yeah.
Anders is older. Moses is older.
Harry, sorry, not Harry. Who am I thinking of? I don't know at this point.
I don't know. I'm not a hive mind.
We're not a hive mind. You guys haven't even been drinking.
Oh, I've finished my hive.
I had one.
I would have liked more, but I've left the box on.
These are tiny and they're low alcohol content.
They are very.
I could probably drink 800 of these. This is like taking a shot.
This is the shot, yeah.
It's a shot of beer.
Poke a hole in the side and just skull it down.
I'll drink to that.
But yeah, I think that we've chatted about that topic enough. I guess we'll look to close things down, Parker. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Is there anything else that you want me to
Oh, we'll do some exclusive content.
Well, yeah, we've got some exclusive content.
What is exclusive content? What does that mean?
No, we have a little Patreon community that, well, basically give us money.
You're capitalist shills.
Yep, we are, and they get a little bit of extra content. Now we also have.
Question: do I get any of the money?
Well,
Because that will influence my. That will influence my.
We can give you a
no, but you get to keep your clothes on. Normally, I guess would take.
I would offer you incentives, but the money you wouldn't notice the money coming in.
I accept that trade. I will keep my clothes on. It's a relief to hear.
We'll be getting you to, obviously, we've got a little giveaway. There's a poster underneath all of our
we'll shop later. It's
crap, which we'll get you to sign later.
It's quite the setup.
It is. What do you think of the setup that we've kind of cooked up here? Because I originally the goal was, hey, we finally got this fucking event. We want to obviously chat with the greatest minds of Rainbow Six Esports,
and then we got Parker
and we were like, how are we going to do this? And it was going to be in a hotel room with a couple of pod mics.
I mean, it's janky as hell, but I mean, it's impressive given the set of circumstances. What people can't see is that the camera is sitting on a box of chocolates and cookies on top of a garbage bin.
He just called shapes chocolates and cookies.
Well, he's not aware of what the fuck it is.
Those are for Raven. Actually, they're an Australian savory
I don't care what
snack.
they're for. They look like a box of cookies.
Well, they're better than cookies.
They flipped over the hotel garbage bin, and then they put 2 packages of cookies on it, and then the phone is sitting on that. And I gotta say, you really jerry-rigged the hell out of it.
I mean, it works well, right?
It works perfectly. It's great. That's the steadiest cam I've seen in a long time.
It's so bad that it's impressive.
It circles back, right?
Are we pivoting?
It goes. We pivot. We pivot from it being shit to this is genius because it works. But no, I gotta say, like, I'm not used to being on the other side of the podcast.
Did you have fun? Is the main question. That's the ultimate question.
I'm just here for the violence.
You're not here against your will. This is you chose to be on here.
I am a willing participant.
You are a willing
in this
participant.
Blood sport that is the Xenox and sometimes occasionally Guzz shows up podcast. I had a great time. Yeah, like I said, I'm not used to being on the other side of the mic. I'm used to being the one who runs the show.
Well, hopefully
this is fun.
Hopefully we share future events together and we can perhaps have an encore.
That'd be nice.
Yeah. That'd be nice.
Maybe not a stack of cookies.
Well, maybe I'll invest in a tripod.
You know, they're really not a lot of money.
Well, we're not on the same money as you, so
they're like $20, guys. Like, come on. The pack of Heineken is probably the same price. You didn't even pay for the beers.
I don't.
You stole them. You stole them from Manic.
We did steal them from Rob.
You could have stolen a tripod.
We stole his equipment.
I've had my phone buzzing. I'm wondering if he's actually sent us a message asking
where the fuck are my beers?
The beers?
Did you guys take a pack of beers? There's only 2 cases here.
I haven't seen a message.
I think it is charitable to call these beers.
To be fair, they are very tiny and not that expensive.
Look at this. Puny
beers. But no, glad that you've had some fun.
I had a great time.
And very much appreciate you, of course, taking some time out of your day. Evening, day, night, whatever it is.
I'm missing the catering right now.
Well, we both
are, so stop complaining.
So
there's 3 of us.
Well, am I not missing the catering?
I don't know. You might have eaten already. I have no idea.
All right. Well, hopefully for those watching along at home, you've enjoyed this particular episode, a little bit of an insight into Parker, INTERRO, formerly INTERRO Bang.
Well, for like 2 weeks.
I thought I'd just throw that
changed, for those that don't know, I changed my name because people thought it was sexual, and I didn't want people thinking that.
You just run around banging.
So the name obviously predates Rainbow Six, but then obviously coming into Rainbow Six, people assumed that INTERRO was just short form for interrogation. And they thought that Bang was having sex. So they were like, is it having sex while being interrogated? And I was like, why would you think that?
It wasn't?
No. And INTERRO Bang is a grammatical character. But people were like, because my name used to be INTERRO Banging, which is a double entendre.
Oh, because it was even worse.
We don't all nail our brands.
No, we don't.
But then Twitch, right as I got partnered on Twitch, they released a bunch of old names, and INTERRO actually got freed up, and I just grabbed it. I was like, you know what?
Yeah,
I'll fully rebrand. So.
Banged out the bang.
No bang.
No bang. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed this episode.
Subscribe.
Almost as if you are sitting in the hotel room with us, having a beer.
That would be
chatting
quite
with
strange. if they were actually in here. Could you
It's a
imagine?
I mean, but
spacious-
that is the vibe that
It's a spacious
that we've
room.
wanted to provide to everyone at home, and hopefully everyone has enjoyed this. If you have, hit the subscribe button.
It really helps us out.
It does help us out.
You could have got
and
it.
Parker.
Maybe Parker could have done the
Do you
shout
want
outs.
to do the outro, Parker, and close this one out?
You got to shout out the Patreon as well.
What is the Patreon?
Patreon.com/Jake and
But
Guzz.
just the Patreon.
The link is down below.
It's
We live in an information economy. Okay. Come in a little closer. Everybody's eyeballs are worth a lot of money, and we appreciate your eyeballs. And we also appreciate your fingers, which you're going to use to like and subscribe. And then also type in and go to the Patreon and like and subscribe that as well. And get entered for giveaways and goodies. I don't know if you do that, but now you do. We do.
Yeah, we have the post.
There you go.
giveaway. Yep.
It really helps me out, but it really helps them out. And frankly, we need more content for Rainbow Six, and this is good content. Whether it's me on the show or other people. I've seen your clips posted on social media, and yeah, I hope this keeps going for a while, and the audience obviously plays a role in that.
Thank you very much. With that, we say goodbye.
Goodbye.